The theatre of absurd emerged as a distinct phenomenon in French dramaturgy of the 1950s and 1960s. This movement is often described as avant-garde or experimental theatre, and also as anti-theatre or theatre of derision. The absurdists rejected the aesthetic of realistic theatre, where the director thought to make the audience forget they were watching a performance by closely imitating real life. The absurdists, on the contrary, rebelled against this identification between the stage and reality. They created an anti-theatre, a theatre liberated from stereotypical thinking and ideology. For an ideological theatre becomes a servant of its idea, vulgarizes it, pushing a genuine art to the background. The theatre of the absurd is characterized by following fundamental principles. The theatre refers only to itself, the characters exist solely within the course of the play. The action takes place in an imaginary world, not only bound by time or space. There is no symbolic logic, uniting meaning and expression. The theatre's aim is not to communicate throughout, but to create spectacle. Words and objects possess full autonomy. Language loses its communication of function and becomes scientific object. Of particular importance is the so-called crisis of language. According to absurdists, words are often misled, where their meaning changes depending on context. Thus, the theatre of absurd rejects linguistics faith and instead gives precedence to the language of gesture and movement. To a certain extent, absurdist drama was influenced by surrealism as a movement. Alfred Jarry's Abu Roy is considered a precursor of absurd drama. Its characters are depersonalized, equipped with masks and artificial voices, and often embody collective or mass figures. Equally significant was the influence of Tony Ardard on absurdist theory. His work, The Theatre and its Double, can be viewed as a kind of prophecy of absurdist philosophy. From surrealism, the theatre of the absurd inherited an emphasis of dreamlike space, the rejection of language as communication, illogicality, and associative freedom. The term art of absurd precisely captures the essence of this aesthetic. It denotes the creative method of algism, the deliberate rejection of rational structure. The worlds created by absurdist dramatists are the appropriation to reality. They do not conform to general laws or inner logic. However, they are not purely fantastic either. They express fragments of reality, but those fragments are arranged in a way that defies natural cohesion, producing an artificial, illogical whole, the world of absurd. Eugen Slonesco wrote in his notes and counter-notes, "Theatre is the lyricism of inner world. Theatre is a communion of people on stage who are immersed in their dreams, fears, desires, and in their eye. The visionary is one who blindly trusts his unconscious sensations, his visions, his instincts." Slonesco thought to create fierce, unrestrained theatre, a theatre of shouting, because as he believed, the modern man, who has witnessed the devaluation of values and lost control over his spiritual condition, is left with the power to scream. As previously noted, although surrealism had considerable influence on absurdist drama, its philosophical foundation is primarily existentialist. According to existentialist philosophy, life is not a historically determined process, but a rather chain of coincidences, a process that lacks both logic foundation and meaning. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that absurd as a state of existence is nothing other than man's relationship to the world. Absurdity expressed the separation between human striving for wholeness and the reconcilable dualism of mind and nature, between man's yearning for eternity and the finitude of his being, between human's fuss and labor and the vitality of that labor. Absurdity arises when the human mind, suddenly illuminated by unbearable clarity, realizes that life has been lived in meaningless repetitive rhythm, waking up, going to work, returning home, sleeping, and repeating endlessly. Then the stage set collapses, and if man refuses consolation of religion or philosophy, he faces a terrifying revelation. The universe is chaos, there is no tomorrow, for man is immortal. At that moment, a man asks himself, why am I human rather than a tree among trees? He realizes that if he were a tree, the question of meaning, world would not exist, for he would be one with the universe rather than standing in opposition to it. Albert Camus wrote that absurd is born from the confrontation between the human cry for meaning and the unreasonable silence of the world. In an absurd world, the value of life is measured by its bareness. Man remains alien both to the universe and to himself. To men of the absurd, existence appears brilliant, yet frozen, transparent, yet confined. It is the world where nothing is possible, yet everything is given. The absurd man lives only for the present moment. He has no ideals, goals, or moral values. He adapts himself to whatever mode of life is offered, and is content with it. In an age of modern disintegration, enslaved by technology, man has lost the ability to choose. He fears individuality and longs to be like everyone else. In 1951, Eugen Slonesco remarked that he wished to create a theatre, or something that might be called theatre, an abstract theatre, a pure drama that would be anti-mathematical, anti-philosophical, anti-ideological, anti-psychological, anti-bourgeoisie. He achieved this to a significant extent, for his plays are either stripped of logical reasoning or consist of nonsensical and unities of meaningful situations. His dramas or anti-plays resemble no earlier works of theatre. They consist of meaningless wordplay, cliches, random explanations, mispronounced conjectures, and grammatical absurdities. Slonesco's characters are free from any psychological depth. They are anti-heroes, mechanisms devoid of emotion or empathy toward anyone or anything. They either know nor wish to know how to interact with one another or with the outside world. They are diseased with solitude. In this Slonesco stage, world mirrors the condition of modern humanity. A man has become a machine, enslaved by technology, estranged from human connection. This results in a profound and unreleasing sense of loneliness that never leaves him. As Oswald Spengler observed, man has done so much with his small creative power that he has become the slave of his creation. The absurdists make no attempt. Following Nietzsche, Arthur dreamed of rival Dionysian art that would possess not only synthetic but also magical power of influence. He envisioned a return to ancient ritualistic theater, in which that spoken word was divine, not dialogical. Words were meant to be heard, not answered. However, the transformation was not merely about reducing text in favor of physical expression. In the theater of cruelty, the world was to assume the function of gesture, an element of larger spatial language that combined voice, movement, and symbol. The language of signs, correct the bodily, was meant to replace abstract speech. As Arthur wrote, to overcome language is to touch life. The language of theater of cruelty had exorcistic power. It's thought to restore the unity of mind and body, the feeling and throughout with our spectators. Hence, Arthur envisioned the theater as a ritual purification, a space where spectators throughout total spectacle could commune with cosmetic elements of existence. He called his new phenomenon transcendental trance. In the noisy space of modern Dionysian stage, man could, Arthur believed, protect himself from the destructive force of history. He saw in this essential demand of his time. Perhaps this is where Jerzy Grotowski meant what he said. We have only entered Arthur's mind's world. Yet the phase may be implied that in the postmodern age, theoretical creation itself becomes a form of performance. What is certain is that Arthur philosophy, vision, and creative language became one of his main foundation upon which of the theater of the absurd was built. Before examining the ideas and works of absurdist playwright more closely, it is essential to turn the observation of John Cotte, who offered a brilliant interpretation of presence of absurd with the ancient Greek tragedy. Cotte believed that Franz Kafka was meant to uncover the problem of absurd in Greek myth. His reflection of Prometheus, contained in the short prose, The Four Legends, revealed four mythic variations of the same theme. In Prometheus Bound, the drama begins with Prometheus chained to a desolate Caucasian cliff and ends with his descent into the beast of Tartarus. His punishment takes place between heaven and earth, the god above, men below. The play depicts the first cosmetic division, the separation of upper and lower worlds, the history of gods and a man. In the divine plane, Zeus overthrew his father as his father had overthrown his own. In the human place before Prometheus stole fire for them, mankind were like crawling worms, hiding in mountain clefts, devoted to thought and self-awareness. Prometheus declares, I give them reason, yet he also gave them something else, far more mysterious and relentless. I filled them with blind hopes. A world that contains only worthful gods and crawling worms is neither tragic nor absurd. The world became absurd only throughout Prometheus' compassion, throughout his gift of mind and blind hope. Absurdity arises, Camus wrote, from the collision between human aspiration and the irrational silence of the world. It is confrontation that defines the meaning of life. Thus, Prometheus became the first absurd hero, the first to challenge the vision of cosmos into upper and lower realms, the first to make men equal to gods by instilling in him a vain hope that he might one day revile them. The myth insists on Camus writes that a universe inherently mindless, that is all one can truly say of it. Yet the absurd resides in the clash between his mindlessness and man's feverish desire for understanding, an echo that reverberates in the depth of human soul. Chained to the Caucasian rock, Prometheus faced an eternal choice. He knows what the future holds. He could save himself by revealing to Zeus the identity of a woman destined to bear a son stronger than his father, but he remains silent. Prometheus refuses compromise. He is an absurd hero, because absurdity retains mainly only as long as one does not reconcile with it. According to Kafka's second version, he gradually merges with the rock, to which he is bound until he himself becomes stone. Yet human suffering, too, has its limits. In the third and fourth versions, yet the gods and eagle forget him. All have grown weary of torments. In the timeless divine dimension, human suffering loses all sense, for time itself has dissolved. As Camus noted, in an absurd world, the value of life or of ideas is measured only by their futility. Of the entire legend, only Caucasian mountains remain. In the history of drama, there are only two works in which the protagonist never leaves stage, from the beginning to the end of the play. Prometheus Bound and Samuel Beckett's Happy Day. In the latter, the female character Winnie is buried up to her waist in the sand in the first act, up to her neck in the second. There is no course, only paralyzed men who cannot approach her. The mountain and the earth, the upper and lower worlds, continue to exist, but the sky is empty. There is not even a cloud. The earth is nothing but a heap of ash. Vinny, half buried, immobilized, and all alone, still smiles endlessly, just as Camus Sisyphus smiles as the rock once again slips from his hands and rolls down the slope. The world, devoid of a ruler, no longer appears barren to her. One struggle towards summit. Camus' wrote is enough to fill a man's heart with joy. Thus, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Likewise, Prometheus chained to Caucasian crag endures his fate without submission. He chooses rebellion and reconciliation, silence over betrayal. His tragedy lies not in his suffering, but in his awareness, the consciousness of endless futility and the refusal of yield. Just as Aeschylus' orchestra, the myth of Prometheus, also ends with overcoming of contradiction. Aeschylus sought to transcend absurdity by integrating human time into cosmetic and divine time, the theology of cosmology. Yet even within the divine structure, absurdity persists, reappearing in each link of tragic chain. Absurdity in Aeschylus' tragedy, like Prometheus suspended between heaven and earth, the watchman in opening scene of Agamemnon stands upon the roof of the place, gazing towards mountains, waiting for the signal fires that will announce Troy's fall. The war has ended. The cycle of murder and vengeance has not. In Orestia, absurdity arises from double reckoning, one historical, the other human. Iphigenia and Cassandra must die so that Zeus must transform from a cruel to a just god. To attain higher concept of justice, Orestes must stay his mother. Yet within the merciless cycle, the truth falsehood cannot be separated. Agamemnon obeyed the gods when he led the Greek army against Troy to rescue Helen. But to appease Artemis, he was forced to sacrifice his own daughter. Troy was reduced to ashes, men and children were slaughtered, and the sacred was discredited. Now the gods exert vengeance upon the Greeks themselves. The god remained vigilant, ensuring that every crime is avenged. History is always bloodstained, and divine justice is often indistinguishable from cruelty. When Clementia kills Agamemnon, she does so for love, vengeance, for his sacrifice of Iphigenia, and for beginning Cassandra as his concubine. Yet even this act is not enough for the gods. Before his death, Agamemnon hesitates upon the cremise of carpet laid out before the palisade gate. He knows that by doing so, he invokes the wrath of gods. When he finally sets a foot upon it, then transformation occurs. The executioner becomes the victim. Ultimately, it is absurd that stepping upon a red carpet could provoke divine punishment. Absurd that the cosmos, which answers every human plea with silence, should impose its own incomprehensible order upon us. Yet it is equal absurd that man should attempt to impose his own meaning upon cosmos. The place of Artridae has thus become a laboratory of divine justice, a ritualized theater of cruelty. In Austria, after killing his mother, Orestes is pursued by Erinus, who sting him with venom and whips visible only to him. Yet more hallucinations. They are the material embodiment of maternal curse and guilt. And among us, they finally appear on stage, their blood-soaked bodies before audience eyes. As Arthur wrote, if we can no longer grasp the true essence of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Shakespeare, it is because we have lost the material sense of the theater. For Aeschylus, metaphysics is theater and maternal. When Prometheus is hurled into the abyss, it is complete by thunder and lightning. The cursed Io rushes across the stage with the head of a cow, pursued by invisible godfather whose tongue drives her into an endless motion. In Greek imagination, both realist and surrealist unite with the divine was always corporeal. The body of man is also the body of animal. For God to unite with a man, he must assume from form of a beast and transform humanity into a visual reflection of himself. To be possessed, the Greeks believed, was to be possessed by God. In Orestes, the metaphysical presence of God is still visible. By the time of Sophocles' silence has descended, the divine voices fade. When Orestes wavers before the act of matricide, Apollo's messenger, Philautus, speaks by one line, "Obey the gods." In Sophocles' Electra, Philae remains silent. After the murder, there are no furies, no divine judgment, no purification. The chorus sings ballads and disperses. Orestes and Electra stand beside the two corpses, foreign to the world, to the city, to each other. They exchange no words. They had lived for vengeance, imagined that by killing Clementia and Augustus, they would restore meaning to their lives. Now, confirmed with the death, they find that the world remains unchanged, emptied of meaning. In Antigone, there are 3 suicides. According to Hegel's classification interpretation, Antigone faces a tragic choice between 2 irreconcilable laws, the human and the divine, the family and the state. As Sophocles, Antigone never hesitates. She is unmoved by temporal and pragmatic. It is Creon, not Antigone, who chooses the ruler blinded by pragmatism and absurd stubbornness, struggle to preserve what can no longer be saved. He believes that power extends not only over men, but also over time itself. Their dialogue is dialogue of the deaf, the conversation without communication. From the very beginning, the chorus repeats that human life is a brief and death is inevitable, that eternity will forever remain inaccessible to men. If we were to transparent Sophocles into a Judeo-Christian context, Antigone might be viewed as a religious soul without faith, a woman moved by sacred spirit, yet devoted of belief in divine salvation. She does not even truly bury her brother. She only sprinkles a symbolic handful of dust upon his body. The gesture changes nothing. It is purely symbolic, yet forbidden under penalty of death. Antigone is thus another absurd hero. As Camus wrote, "I have seen her." One who has performed a futile gesture in defiance of meaninglessness, seeking to give significance to the void. Condemned to embode alive, she is led throughout the stress, all avert their eyes. She realizes that then she is stranger not only to the cosmos, but also to her own city. At first, death was her conscious choice, a way to confirm a meaning upon existence, but now death comes from outside, imposed by decree. Her suicide ceases to an act of will. It becomes an act of despair. Antigone is defeated by the absurd. Later, Creon reverses his decision. He wishes to be Pelosus and relays Antigone. But it is too late. The messenger announces that he had arrived sooner. She might have been saved. Sophocles, with deliberately and cruelty, irony, strips her death of its final dignity, the dignity of necessity. Her death was not inventable after all. Now all are affected by death. Hymen thrusts a sword into his chest. Eugene hangs himself, and Creon, carrying his son's body, flees in terror. Tragedy, however, remains invincible. The destruction of Thebes has predetermined. The mechanisms had already been set in motion from above. Nothing Antigone could do, heroic or otherwise, could alter it. When Oedipus Rex, absurdity governs fate. It is absurd not only that Oedipus lives with his mother and kills his father, but the destiny is inescapable. The trap has been set, but the mouse has forewarned. Leos knew his prophecy, and so does Oedipus. Yet the myth offers no moral cause for Leo's crime. It simply is. As Jim Cockney later titled his adaptation, The Infernal Machine, the myth becomes a perfect mechanism for mathematical destruction of a man. In Sophocles, however, neither gods nor men operate the machine. It simply exists, functioning without prophecy or agency. This is a sense of absurd. The trap awaits, but no one has landed. Oedipus is free, just as Mouse is free. But both must die. The problem of determinism and free will no longer applies. There is a game, yet one in which Oedipus must lose. When he hesitates at the crossroad and refuses to yield in a path, he errs and the trap closes. In one remarkable moment, the chorus even rebels against fate. Why should we dance a sacred dance? They ask. If men can be stronger than gods, if such rebellion were possible, tragedy would cease to exist. But the chorus ultimately accepts the absurd order of the world, a world which gods have decreed, that a son shall slay his father and lie with his mother. And yet Oedipus does not submit. He blinds himself but continues to live, not as a punishment, but as a witness of the absurd. In old age, Oedipus and Columbus, he declares this vital suffering. Though I've endured terrible misfortunes, my heart and noble spirit compel to me, say, all is well. Even so, this Oedipus marching towards his sacrificial grave cannot fully reconcile with the absurd. He concludes, there is nothing more blessed than never to be born. In the earlier tragedies, the defeat of heroes still confirmed human greatness. Sometimes defeat itself could possess meaning. It was an act of defiant self-sacrifice, filled with hope, as Camus described. Yet in later works such as Philoctetes, The Women of Traches, and Ajax, even defeat loses meaning. Absurdity echoes through both this world and the next, throughout the human and the divine alike. The victim still evokes horror, but no longer pity. At times only a certain disgust remains. Orestes is pursued by Phares. The Sophocles, after the blood of Clemenstra and Osticus is spilled, everything becomes empty and meaningless as silence replaces divine vengeance. In Euripides' Electra, the Furies are replaced by divine twins, Castor and Politius, who appear calm, ironic, and smiling. They announce that everything that has occurred was simply a misunderstanding, a cosmic mistake. The Trojan War, they say, was an error, for Ellen was never even in Troy. The gods had hidden her safety in Egypt. The prophecy that incited matricide was also false, for Apollo had no right to urge a son to kill his mother. Euripides employs every orthodox version of myth only to undermine it, to strip both myth and reality of authority. His use of anchorism to deliberate distortion of irony is a coherent and deliberately theoretical method, one that Bertolt Brecht would later call elimination effect. When we take to be obvious and the questionable is the fact that absurdism, what we call absurd, often arises from an everyday experience itself. It's the name of Greek tragic heroes, Oedipus, Electra, Antigone, were later adopted by Freud to describe the complexes of unconscious, Jungian term. Sought the archetypes of divinity and collective unconscious. Euripides, however, assigned divine names not to physiological forces, but human absurdities, to reason weaknesses, errors, corruption. His gods descend from heavens to the stage. Yet these deities are no longer divine in essence. Euripides was not a primitive rationalist. His deus ex machina, the theoretical device of gods descended by crime, is itself a metaphor for irrational, presented through the medium of human form. In greatness of all tragical cycles, Prometheus was contained by jealous God for giving fire, mind, and hope to man. His torment ends only after 10,000 years, and he is freed by the Son of God and immortal woman. At the conclusion of this immense cycle, another Son of God and immortal woman appear in Thebes. He takes on human form and brings a new religion to the world, but he is not the son whose actual Prometheus had foretold. This god Dionysus, summons the women to abandon their city, ascend the mountains, and in scared dance devour his flesh and drink his blood. In return, he promised them release from all punishment, from fear, prohibition. He promised the restoration of lost paradise when men will be innocent as the beasts. Yet in this Pharaohite ritual, when a mother possessed by divine ecstasy tears apart the body of her own son, he merely smiles and departs. Greek tragedy originated in festivals, yet himself appears only in the last surviving tragedy, Euripides, the Bacchae. He wears a golden mask, upon which a sweet and sorrow smile is engraved. The ambiguous and energetic smile over the mask itself, the final sign of absurd, is ancient Greek tragedy. The theater of absurd, through the prediction of modern age, finds its deepest roots in the Greek method and tragedy. The ancient dramatist Sophocles' Euripides had been revealed the metaphysical solitude of a man, his confrontation with an incomprehensible divine order, and the futility of his struggles for meaning. In Prometheus' rebellion, Antigone defends Oedipus' blindness and Dionysus' cruel smile. The absurd is born and reborn, not as denial of existence, but as pure expression. The tragic stage of Greece was already stage of the absurd.